Your folks are here. Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Well, on behalf of Emmanuel Church, I get to welcome the Right Reverend Eugene Taylor Bishop to talk about racial reconciliation and the Episcopal Church. And welcome, Bishop Sutton. It's wonderful to have you here. As we know, Bishop Sutton was elected to the Diocese of Maryland in 2008. He's written about and been recognized as a thought leader on the issues of racial reconciliation and reparations, testifying on Capitol Hill with author Ta-Nehisi Coates, actor Danny Glover, and others for Congressional Bill H.R. 40 that calls for the establishment of a national bipartisan commission to study and make recommendations for addressing reparations as a restitution for the over 350 years of slavery and racial discrimination of African Americans. So I could say a lot more about Bishop Sutton, but I think right now I'm going to stop there and let him start off our forum this afternoon. Or I should say this morning.
That's right. Well, give it time. We'll be in the afternoon if you guys...
There you go.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you for that introduction. As I sometimes say, I get embarrassed at those things. I really wish she had said more, but but we'll take it. And thank you, Anne Marie. It's good to see your face again, Anne Marie. I remember I first met her. I met her on paper, and then I met her in person and talked with her as one of the nominees for your to be your rector. And I remember thinking right then, within 5 minutes of talking with her, I was saying, I think I know who Emmanuel Church is going to choose. And it made me very happy when they did. Know that you've been in our prayers, Anne Marie, health-wise, in your full recovery from the heart condition last year. And all these things take a while, and you're progressing well. And I'm just very, very happy that you're here with us. And I am very, very proud of Emmanuel Church, have been over the years. This is one strong and resilient and vibrant community. And one of the examples of that is the forum that you want me to lead today. And so we're going to get started, but I never get started without just a little silence and then a word of prayer for the Holy Spirit to guide our time together. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, in this hour, so draw our hearts to you. So guide our minds. So fill our imaginations. So control our wills, that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you. And then use us, we pray, as you will, and always to your glory and the welfare of your people. Through your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
That prayer, by the way, page 828 in the Book of Common Prayer, William Temple, sometime Archbishop of Canterbury around World War II. A treasury of prayers. Memorize many of them. Begin with one, your favorite, and use them a lot. So now, let's talk about race. Yay! There's a conversation that almost all of us want to avoid, precisely because it's really difficult to talk about. It's written with many emotions, including sadness, grief, guilt, anxiety, anger, hopelessness. The emotionality of particularly Americans talking about race is exhibited in such things as, I've never received death threats for anything I've ever said or done in this diocese until I spoke out for, we're going to try to repair the damage of what we helped cause in race for hundreds of years, and reparations. Then we had to call the police, and every threats made against my life and family. And we find that constantly throughout. It's emotional with people. And you know it's touching deep to the core of deep hurt and pain and anger. So I'm not going to try to overload you with more than you can handle in this one brief time, but I do promise to give you some things to take home with you about where we are and how we can get to where we all want to be as a nation, as a state, as a city of Baltimore, and as Emmanuel Church in the area of race relations. And one more thing, prepare yourself to get angry at me at some time in this presentation, okay? But don't worry, you're supposed to get mad, so it'll be fine. If you're angry at me, it's part of the process. I'm the messenger, okay? Good, here we go. So if you ask most Americans, are we as a nation better off now in our race relations than are we better off now than where we were 50 years ago during the age of the civil rights era? The answer is sobering. On that, we are agreed. From a survey on race relations in America by the Pew Research Center in April of 2019 says that 2019, a majority of Americans say that race relations in the United States are bad. And of those, about 7 in 10 people say that things are getting worse. Almost 70% of people say it's become more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views in the last 5 years. And significantly, even most white people don't feel good about where we are. Now, if you ask a Black person on the streets of Baltimore, where most of us live, are we better off now racially since Martin Luther King Jr.? What do you think they're going to say? Man, please, it's not going to happen. And almost all of us thought we'd be much farther along than we are now. Now, I'm of the generation where I remember Woodstock. Anybody here remember Woodstock? Yep, you're old. 1969, Love-Ins, Peace and Harmony, Age of Aquarius, when the moon was in its 7th house, and Jupiter aligns with Mars, you know it, and peace will guide the planets, and love will fill the stars. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I'm not going to go on. You don't pay me that much to go on, but I will open at the 17th Street McDonald's soon, I hope, on that. But that was the age of Aquarius. We thought it was all going to be better, and that our generation was going to bring in peace and harmony. Well, by some measures, we really are in a better place. The signs are down saying whites only and colored only, especially in the South. We've integrated all of the water fountains, the bathrooms. There's still a problem with some swimming pools. I don't know if y'all know that. And not all clubs are open either. A lot of people don't know or refuse to know about that. More and more Black people can purchase homes in more and more neighborhoods. We're on TV and on movie screens in starring roles. Great strides in access to education, higher education, and good jobs. Fewer instances of she or he is the first Black person to, and you fill in the blank. We're still there. I was a lot of the headlines when I was elected, first Black bishop of Maryland. And I started talking a lot about my concerns for the environment and environmental degradation. And so people were saying, well, he's really the green bishop. And so I'd be introduced in a room full of white faces, and here is our green bishop. I hope you get the joke. But the significance is that I was elected in this ballot, in this diocese in 2008 on the first ballot. The previous bishop who was elected on the first ballot was the first bishop of Maryland. Claggett, Thomas John Claggett, who was a slave owner, as were most of the Anglican clergy in the diocese. And I was elected in this diocese where in 40 years earlier, in 1968, I would not have been welcomed as a worshiper in half the churches in this diocese, including several in Baltimore. Now that's a lot of change. I don't for a moment want to minimize the very substantial gains in racial justice over the last 50 years. We can all celebrate the tremendous strides that have been made in racial attitudes in our nation. And we're proud of the accomplishments of the many Black individuals who have overcome great odds to achieve success, and with allies in the white community who risk their livelihoods and sometimes their lives. And in this diocese, many clergy and laypersons risked ostracism from their other church members and family members, places of work and clubs, speaking out for racial justice. I don't want to minimize any of that. But my sisters and brothers, for the millions of descendants of slaves who are trapped in a pernicious cycle of hopelessness, poverty, and rage due to their real experience of racial segregation, redlining, inferior schools, and the like, the widespread assumption that everyone and anyone can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps is a lie. It's a lie that people who have made it can tell themselves as an explanation of why others have not. They know that the odds are against them on so many fronts. We have a program, one of the programs in this diocese, the Sutton Scholars Program. I didn't name it, but this diocese made a commitment to about 100 high school students in the public schools in the city of Baltimore. And by the way, thank you for your support, all who supported that. To knowing that the public schools cannot prepare them to be the men and women they want to be. Did you get the news over the last several days of that young man who has graduated where he flunked most of his classes and the system put him through and his mother doesn't know what to do? Well, we're committing ourselves to these students who are in danger of falling through the cracks. And they are some of the most motivated kids you'll ever meet. Great kids who are fighting great odds of crime and poverty and violence. But I know no matter how hard they try, none of them are going to an Ivy League school. None of them are going to get a high-paying job, and it's not their fault. It's the system. It's a systemic problem for the masses. They cannot change their environment. The odds are against them on so many fronts, and they cannot change the color of their beautiful dark skin. These days, it certainly doesn't feel that we're closer to being a more racially harmonious and a society of equity than we were when Dr. Martin Luther King was cut down by the rifle of another terrorist, white supremacist, in 1968. By the way, the war on terrorism did not begin in 2001. If you were Black in America, the war on terrorism began in 1619. And it's been terror for most of our history. African Americans comprise only 13% of the US population and only 14% estimated of regular drug users. But guess what? Almost 40% of the people arrested for drug-related offenses in America are Black. Why? Studies show that police are more likely to pull over and frisk Black and brown persons, about 80% less than pulling over whites for other suspected offenses. And several years ago, in another study, African Americans are 21% more likely than whites to receive mandatory minimum sentences and 20% more likely to be sentenced to prison than white drug offenders. I could go on and on, lots of studies, numerous studies showing hidden, implicit bias in some amount in all of us. And when I say all, I mean all. Especially those who say, I don't see color or race, and I don't have a racist bone in my body. The studies show, no, let's go deeper. The way I put it is, racism is the ocean in which we all swim, and a fish doesn't know it's wet because a fish only lives in the ocean. We live in an ocean of racism. How can we all not be affected by it? Even to this day, Black young girls and some boys prefer white dolls over Black dolls because somehow they've gotten the word, they've gotten the message that white is better. Breaks our hearts, breaks my heart. I was reading last year about doctors, medical doctors, showing more racist attitudes when they are not rested, when they do lots of shifts. And you may have been seeing more and more of these studies of how, on the whole, Black patients are not prescribed the same medicines as white patients and given the same degree of care. And I know that breaks Laura's heart. Laura, you're a nurse. And well, anyway, so suffice it to say that I and other African Americans are very interested in the medical professions. Get your rest. Get enough sleep before you care for me. I want to make sure you're in your A game. As a young man in college, I kept hearing young people today are growing up in a less racist, multiracial, and multicultural world, and they get it. So racism will be practically dead in a generation, or maybe two at the most. Well, now it's been 2 generations since King, and here we are. Are we doomed to live in this nation in racial strife, mistrust, conflict? If that's true, then why? And if so, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? So at the risk of being labeled a hopeless optimist, I'm just going to quickly list 4 things that I know we can do. We can do as a church, we can do as a society, we can do as an individual. The first 3 I'm going to say very quickly, and then I'll spend more time in the fourth. First, we need to commit ourselves to having civil conversations. Civil conversation. No more name calling. I live in Baltimore. The names that we are called in our city, in our predominantly Black city, Black and brown city, it comes right out of the playbook of racist tropes and that have been played and replayed in this country for hundreds of years. When our former president, President Trump, made a slur against this nation, this city, a couple of years ago, I wrote him a letter. And it was signed unanimously by every major Christian leader in Maryland. The Roman Catholic Archbishop, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, and others. If we had more time, I'd share some things from that letter about what's happening in Baltimore and why is the slam when you talk about vermin-infested places. Everybody knows you're only talking about a Black or a brown community. A white community is never vermin-infested in this nation. And by the way, I've been to the White House. Did you know there are rats in the White House? There really are. I mean, there's a famous scene of Barbara Bush in the swimming pool, and there was a rat. I mean, like real rats, not humans, in the White House. But you'll never hear the White House being called vermin-infested. It's a slur. It was said against Jews. in World War II, and it's been said about Black and brown people. Let's have civil conversations, no more name calling. 2, we need to remind ourselves that critique, social critique of our nation and its history and its present life is both healthy and patriotic. And by the way, critique of the church is healthy. It's healthy. Our founding fathers would be appalled at some of what they're seeing now when people are critiquing our nation and telling the truth, who are being called unpatriotic. Our founding fathers would be appalled, since this is exactly what we wanted to avoid. I could go on, but let me get to my third one. 3, we need people of courage to call out the perniciousness of racist language and behavior whenever you encounter it. And I mean at home, in the workplace, in social settings. We need people of courage. Again, at some other point, I could really talk about examples of each of those 3 things I've said about having civil conversations, recognizing that social and even religious critique is very important. And 3, to be people of courage. But here's the 4th, and here's where I'm going to spend a little more time before we throw it open for question. We need to repay the debt, now long overdue, that this nation has owed for almost 400 years of slavery and racial oppression. I think some attempt to do that is going to be absolutely necessary if we want to move ahead. Did you know that, okay, now I'm going to say why. Why do we need to do that? Despite the generally negative assessments of the current state of race relations, Americans tend to say that most racial and ethnic groups get along fairly well with one another. And I could give you this stat. 6 in 10 say the relations between whites and Asians are pretty good. 73% Hispanics and Asians, between Blacks and Hispanics, between whites and Hispanics, between Blacks and Asians, all huge majorities of people say, well, you know, in general, we get along fairly well. But assessments of how well Blacks and whites get along are much more divided. In fact, a majority of people saying, whites and Blacks saying, relations between whites and Blacks are not that great. Why? There's a significant gap. What's the problem between whites and Blacks in this nation? I wonder what. My answer in large part is because of a thing called slavery. For 250 years, beginning in 1619, white people enslaved Black people. And then for at least the next 110 years or so until the end of the Civil Rights era around 1970, white people in general, obviously not all, but in general, and the system made it nearly impossible for Black people to get good jobs, good housing, good education, good health care, even by law. You just couldn't do it. And what was the church's stance to that? I'll tell you what the Episcopal Church's stance was largely. The church blessed it. The church blessed it. This 350 plus year period of overt, constant, and pervasive oppression has left a scar, not just on Black persons, but on the souls of white persons. We are a scarred nation. This nation has never, ever, as a nation, apologized for this 4 centuries of monstrous conduct. and has never made a single attempt to actually repay the Black community for what it stole from them. And yes, the word is stolen. It was thievery. The nation stole from people of African descent in this nation for centuries, stole their labor, stole their livelihoods, stole their lives. And what is the cumulative effect of not being able to really have adequate resources for living vis-a-vis the rest of the population for 350 years? And that somehow to think, well, okay, at the end of the civil rights era, I guess we were all wrong about that. Sorry, we're all equal now. No. And that directly has to do, the effect of that is what I suggested earlier about our Sutton scholars. The deck is stacked against them, and there is no wealth in the family. Nothing was handed down. Thievery. And one of the 10 commandments says, thou shalt not steal. And yet the church blessed the stealing. But you know, I learned something in Sunday school a long time ago. If you steal something from someone, the right thing to do is pay it back or make some attempt to restitution. This nation stole from my people, and it enriched itself. The Diocese of Maryland stole from Black people. We've documented this history. We stole. What's the right thing to do? As a religious leader, I know that full reconciliation between persons who have been estranged will never be possible unless and until restitution is paid to the injured party. That's true in interpersonal relationships. It's true in a society as well. What about forgiveness? Some will say, well, I'm all for it. In fact, I said when I was before Congress, I booed the statement, and I said, most Black Americans have forgiven this nation a long time ago. But it's true, it's fact. You know, we can be angry, but we've forgiven. We're here. We're patriotic. We've even fought for this nation when this nation would not fight for us. We spilled blood. I have an uncle who spilled blood overseas and came back and couldn't get a job. And by the way, don't ever criticize a Black person in this nation as being unpatriotic when we criticize and protest America in the ways that we can. Descendants of slaves are, surprisingly for some of the most loyal Americans you will ever find. It's just that we love America enough to criticize it. We're not leaving. We're not going back. And we're not going back to whatever racist, derogatory name you can give to other countries where our Black ancestors came from. One former president called them shithole countries. Incredible. That's very hurtful. But we're not going back. We helped build this country. In our diocese, we built half the churches that are in this diocese, unpaid. So we're not going back unless white people go back to theirs first. You go back, and then we'll think about it. No, we aim to stick around and make America squirm as much as possible until she lives up to her soaring creeds about freedom and justice for all. By the way, you're welcome. You're welcome. The word that we use to make restitution and to fix the problem is the R word, reparations. Don't let that word scare you. It kicks up a lot of emotion in people, I know, because it is often mischaracterized and largely misunderstood. It's a complex subject that involves economic and political and moral dimensions that are difficult to grasp without a willingness to engage more deeply than having a quick emotional response to it. And depending on what your predominant news source is, if you hear that word reparation on some news sources, it's like, well, it's just bad, 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 bad. But as I was saying to Laura earlier, what we've seen even in this diocese, we've had people in the last 15 years who've joined and been a part of our reparations task force and meetings who says, oh, I'm against it. This is just crazy. It's unworkable. And then when they actually study the issue and what could be done about it, almost 100% of them saying, now I get it. I didn't see it before, but that makes sense. The issue of reparations highlights the racial divide among us, and it creates varying levels of resentment and suspicion, and it accentuates a pain that has long plagued our country since its founding. And so I know the problem. If you say in order to fix the problem, it's got to hurt, who wants to hurt? But you know, when you go to a doctor and the doctor says it's cancer, and you say, well, what do you got to do, doctor? And he says, well, we got to have to have surgery. What person says, no, don't do that because that's going to hurt? Well, to fix our problem, it's going to hurt. But you can't do reconciliation on the cheap. We've tried that for at least the last 30 years, if not the last 110 years. You can forgive someone, but you are not going to be reconciled with them. Reconciliation is when you're able to lock arms and be brothers and sisters and know that there's not a wall between you of some matter that wasn't settled. Reparations, quite simply, means to repair that which has been broken. It's not just about monetary compensation. An act of reparation is an attempt to make whole again, to restore, to offer atonement, to make amends, to reconcile for a wrong or an injury. Everyone living in our great nation has inherited a mess. You and I have inherited a mess created by the institution of slavery. No one on this call caused this brokenness. No one in this generation did. We are not responsible for that brokenness. But 100% of us have a moral responsibility to fix it. We didn't cause it. We don't have to be guilty for it, but we have a responsibility. For generations, the bodies of Black people did not belong to themselves, but were bred and used and sold for the purposes of attaining wealth. That wealth helped to prosper this nation. The nation prospered in part from this evil. And many of our institutions, including, as I said before, sadly, the church, profited as well. But we've learned from both builders and moral leaders that a structure with a broken foundation cannot hope to stand. One of those great moral leaders was Jesus, who said that. If you build the structure on sand, it will not stand. It must be repaired. In the scriptures, in Isaiah 58, here is what the prophet Isaiah prophesied. For people who are it's appropriate for us now during Lent, because he was talking about people who were fasting in order to get right with God. And here's what Isaiah said. Why do you fast? Is this not the fast I choose, saith the Lord? But to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? And to bring the homeless poor into your houses? And when you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from them? If you remove that yoke from among you, then the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in a parched land. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. So how do we repair? That's the end of that quotation, Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 12. So how do we repair the breach that we find ourselves in? We can better see what reparations means by first describing what it is not. Okay, so hear me out. Reparations, first of all, is not throwing money at the problem of racism. And by the way, I find that image offensive. When people talk about throwing money at something or someone, it's almost always referring to the poor, and especially Black and brown people. You throw stuff at them. It's like throwing paper towels at people in need. You never hear that a rich school district is throwing money away at its students. Those schools are well funded. They have buildings that work, adequate school supplies and programs. But when the conversation comes to having, many times, those same resources available to Black and brown students, then you hear, oh no, we can't throw money away at those problems. Again, we're trying to raise money for our scholars program. It's an effort every year. We need $350,000 some dollars every, and we've been raising it every year. But I sometimes get that, well, you know, Bishop Sutton, we don't want to throw money at the problem of education in Baltimore. And I just look at them and I bite my tongue. You stole from their ancestors. They're in that position now, and now you don't want to give another, what, $1,000, $10,000? No, reparations is not throwing the money away. It's instead an emotionally healthy effort to repair a broken system that results in broken lives. And some of that repair, some of that effort involves money. But it's not all about money, but it's not less than money. And so you can say, well, I'll be nice to everybody and I'll give a leg up, but it's not going to cost me anything. Well, that's not reparations. Second, reparations is not a transfer of money from white people to Black people. It's not a transfer of money from white to Black. Rather, it's what this generation does to repair the damage that previous generations caused. It's the commitment of an entire country or a community or a church to repair and heal the mess that we've all inherited. So it doesn't make any difference if your ancestors owned slaves or not, or if you came on the Mayflower or you came on the in the Marielita boats. Doesn't make any difference if you're a new immigrant or an older immigrant, if you're white or Black or Asian. We're all in this mess that we've inherited. Reparations is about all of us coming together to repair it and say, what can we do? Third, reparations is not writing a check to individual Black people in the US. For one thing, that would be unworkable. You'd have to, one thing, explain the problem of race. What's a race? That's a whole other subject. It's a social construct. And you know, I can trace on my family, both of my ancestors on both sides were slaves, were enslaved. But what about interracial marriage? And what, you know, what if, you know, one of them, a grandparent was white or so? Do you get half a check or a quarter of a check? And how do you identify these people? And what about recent immigrants? It's a big problem. And furthermore, to do so, to give individual checks to people would not really undo the damage caused by 350 plus years of slavery and economic conditions. So it's not individual checks to individuals. Rather, reparations is a serious and sustained effort to strategically fund initiatives that are geared to counteract systems that leave millions of Black residents entrapped in communities of poverty, crime, and despair. As I said before, the millions of our brothers and sisters in these communities is not an accident. And it's not the fault of most of the individuals who happen to be born into these communities that they cannot succeed. The system is constantly working against them on so many fronts, and only a few of them facing superhuman odds are able to get out. And you may know some. I do too. In fact, I'm one of them. I was raised in the Black community in Washington, D.C. public schools. And
Bishop, could you
yes.
repeat, Bishop, could you repeat what it is again?
That, okay, here's the line. And by the way, you can get this on the website, our website. Reparations is a serious and sustained effort to strategically fund initiatives that are geared to counteract systems that leave millions of Black residents entrapped in communities of poverty and crime and despair. Just think of it as a systematic effort to fund initiatives. I started to say, I could have been another statistic, and I was falling through the cracks by the time I was a junior in high school. You know what the difference was in my life? Church people of faith reached down to make a difference in my life. They reached down and they reached back. My parents alone, I had great parents, but alone, they couldn't fight all the odds. It took a village, it took a community, and there were a community of folks, and that's what we're trying to do in Maryland too. Have adults reach down and help pull up. So what would some of these efforts look like? You tell me. We've formed a reparations task force. They are now formed, and that reparations task force was formed to actually look at things that the Diocese of Maryland can fund. The Diocese of Maryland made history beginning in May of 2019, when at that convention, we voted to approve the principle of reparations as a means of making restitution. We were one of the very first religious institutions to do that. Several others have done it since our time. Now 5 dioceses have, in schools and institutions, who have researched their history. And then in November, this past November, we voted on the amount of money. We separated out the issue of reparations from the money, because as soon as you start talking about money, you get nowhere, because people wig out when you start talking money. You mean what? So there it is. But we voted to establish a $1 million seed fund in the Diocese of Maryland to fund initiatives to uplift the impoverished Black community in Maryland. $1 million. Why $1 million? It wasn't a mathematical calculation. It was a moral calculation. It represents about 20% of our annual budget. But we are going to seed that fund first from resources taken from hundreds of years of accumulated wealth. And we're just going to take that money out. But it's a seed fund. And so we're asking every congregation to consider contributing to it. And by the way, we haven't even begun to make that ask yet, but already we've started getting checks. I've gotten checks from churches you would not believe in Western Maryland. I've got a check from a church from a poorer blue-collar white congregation. I've gotten a big check from an individual who is not an Episcopalian, but a resident of Maryland, who said, I see what the Diocese of Maryland is doing. Thank you that the church is recognizing its part in this, and for its effort to put its money where its mouth is to correct it. Enclosed was a check for $100,000. I'm getting checks from a number of people, even people who said, I don't even think I like that word reparations, but I like what you're doing. And that task force is charged with funding initiatives, and they have 5 priorities: education, health care for all, affordable housing, job creation, microeconomic investing, if possible, and then a 5th area of environmental degradation that hits the poor Black community the hardest. Well, people, I think I should just stop there. I could go on, and I'm already over, but let me throw this open now for any questions that you may have. And at the very end, I also want to entertain any question you may have about regathering, because I know that's a big thing on your minds too. Okay, so thank you all.
So you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. And while people are thinking, I just want you to know too that in the chat box, I put a link to our Anti-Racism Project report from Emmanuel for those of you who may have not seen it yet on some of the things that we're doing at Emmanuel. So who has a question?
Bishop, I think you're aware we have an anti-racism project at Emmanuel. We have 2 major community partners, No Boundaries Coalition and Hope, helping oppressed people excel, both doing excellent work in the community. We've been meeting for 4 years. But we'd like very much to reach out more to other partners, other people, and other organizations in Baltimore that are doing good work in the field of racial reconciliation. It may be congregations, it could be in the Diocese of Maryland, it could be outside the Diocese of Maryland, other faith organizations, could be schools, could be individuals doing great things. We want to reach out. So we're looking for potential dialogue, potential alliances. We've kind of worked within ourselves for a good while. And I think it's important for us to start doing the work you're talking about doing. And so we're looking for suggestions, and we're always open. If you have anything now or at any time, we would be very much open to hearing your ideas.
Thank you.
We definitely look to you as a leader. That was, I feel, a wonderful presentation that you made. I just loved what you said.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
But thank you for that. And by the way, I've been asked to give some version of this at several other dioceses, the Diocese of Washington last month, but also Fort Worth, Texas. I was down there, and places as well, both religious and non-religious. I applaud what Emmanuel Church is doing. Thank you. Is it Rob? May I call you Rob?
Yes, you may. Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you for what you and Lucy and all the others have done. And I did read what Emmanuel Church is doing. Just some things for suggestion. One, and in no particular order of importance. One, do make friends with that word reparations, and that you're repairing the damage. We've got to redeem that word from those who want to make sure that no money ever goes to people in the impoverished Black community. So that's one. Tie it to that. Two, if you can hold on a little longer in making commitments to fund things, see what the task force is going to recommend. And you're going to start seeing that within the year. Don't think you have to do everything right now, but you can just say, we want to tie in also to what diocesan priorities are, so that Emmanuel can say, in addition to what you are doing on your own with local groups, we support the diocesan effort. I'm going to mention again, we have a diocesan effort in reading camps. That's for young kids. We're doing other things in a diocesan effort for environmental degradation. There are some things we can all do together. The 110 worshiping communities can do it together to make an impact that individual congregations can't do. But you can say, oh, we're a part of that, and then we're listing all those churches that'll help. So for instance, and so the last thing about that is if you want some suggestions for some community groups that you can support and all that, just contact our office and our canon for mission. But I'm asking you to hold off a bit. Hold off until later this year when you hear from the Reparations Task Force. What are those initiatives that they're wanting to fund? Because it may be that Emmanuel Church will say, oh, we want to pick that one. We want to pick that one because others, these 15 people who were representatives from all over the state, they've said this one stands out. One very last thing, we are not tying reparations to assistance to Black congregations, or predominantly Black congregations. There are other means to assist Black congregations, and it gets kind of complicated in that area too. So this is not assistance to congregations. This is funding initiatives in the Black. Okay, others.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat box, Bishop Sutton. My husband and I are physicians in Chicago. What can we do to address health equity as part of reparations?
Well, again, first, get your rest. But thank you, and thank you for calling from Chicago. That is a very good question. I don't know, but it's one of the things that, again, our task force is looking at, what we might be able to do. COVID-19, of course, has broken open the fissures in healthcare delivery in our country. So I don't know. I can say one of the things that I did in the first church I ever served, I was in the poorest part of the Black community in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. And we had some doctors in the congregation. And so we began a health clinic, a neighborhood health clinic. We were Covenant Church. We started the Covenant Health Clinic for people to get screened and all sorts of things in there, because in some of our communities, there is no hospital to be found for a long way out. So who knows, maybe Emmanuel Church can begin a little health clinic in your church that's open, maybe every Wednesday or something for 3 hours, and people can just walk in. So that's just one idea, but it's worthy of being studied for other possibilities for what the church can do. And by the way, I found that health professionals, doctors, nurses, they are only too willing to do that. Mm-hmm. We can build the mechanism, they will volunteer. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
So, beloved Bishop, and just so y'all know, Bishop Sutton actually preached at my ordination to the diaconate and led my pre-ordination retreat, which perhaps to his less than delight was not a silent retreat. Rose Duncan and me and a bunch of other troublemakers. But anyway.
That's right.
Yeah, long time ago. I think you probably, in reading the Anti-Racism Project paper, there's a strong desire, I think, in the Emmanuel community to be a part of something that I think is affected by all those priorities that the Reparations Committee has come up with: education, healthcare, that sort of wraparound services. And that is really breaking the school to prison, neighborhood to prison pipeline. HOPE is an amazing post-incarceration program that has just transformed lives, one at a time, in the basement of a church, which is a classic place for transformation. We all think it happens in the nave. I've seen many lives changed in basements for one reason or another. But I wonder if you're privy to any of the discussions of our diocesan committee. Does that reality of mass incarceration and new, slavery come up as part and parcel of those other priorities? It's all intertwined.
Right. Great question. One is that task force is just getting started. We voted in November, and then you got Christmas and COVID and all that. So they've only had a couple of meetings so far. Undoubtedly, they are also not only talking about that school to prison pipeline or neighborhood to prison pipeline, but they know about hope too. And I think you're going to see some good things come of that in terms of what they believe is worthy of being funded. So that school to prison pipeline is subsumed, as you say, on a number of those priorities, and I know that they're going to be looking at hope as well. And also, I would say Emmanuel Church too. Cast that net fairly widely, but don't forget any diocesan initiatives too, because that has the Diocese of Maryland stamp on it. And so when community leaders know, oh, this is what's happening, there's a group of churches that have gotten together to do that. That makes a big difference. So not just all on your own, but in addition to that, something supporting a diocesan reparation effort. Memorial Church has done some good work on this as well. They've researched their history, and I hope you've read about some of that, and their knowing their history of their rectors and churches' support for the Confederacy, for slavery, and then in the ensuing years, they were at the forefront of redlining and racial segregation, and they've uncovered a lot of that and just doing some great work, including going out to that plantation. What is that? I don't have it before me.
Hampton. I'm the curator of it. And I did a huge amount of research on the enslaved and their descendants. And I've assisted Memorial. I'm now working to assist Trinity in Towson, which has very big connections as well to all this. And we at Emmanuel have to always remember that the slave owning founder of Memorial, before he did that, served, I think it was 6 or 8 years as our assistant rector under Henry Van Dyke Johns here at Emmanuel when we were first founded.
Yep.
So our hands aren't clean in this either.
Well, none of our hands are clean.
Mm-hmm.
We're all in this mess together, but thank you so much for that work. Uncovering the history is a big part of it. I like to say when I was elected in 2008, knowing in this diocese that the first bishop and most of the Anglican clergy were slave owners, and the church helped raise money by slave owning. I think when I was elected, they all were rejoicing in heaven and just saying, it took a long time, but we got that, we got that wrong when we were there. I'm glad the church is finally beginning to correct some of that. Mm-hmm. Reconciliation is the heart of what we're going to do as Christians. No one gets left behind, and all can be forgiven. We just need to do the work of reconciling so that it's easy grace.
So maybe one more question, Bishop Sutton, because we don't want to hold you too long here.
I don't have a question, so let not this be one of them. But you did mention that we could get something of a copy of this talk, or
I'm recording.
You're recording it. Oh,
wonderful.
good. That's
Yeah,
great.
and it'll be up on our YouTube. Anne Marie is helping me figure that all out, which is wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Well, thank you. If you can do that, and this is what the Diocese of Fort Worth did too. It's even better than a written copy where people can just listen. But on our diocesan website, you will find my pastoral letter on reparations, which is, I think, about 20-page letter. You're going to get a lot in that, along with appendices. And by the way, Gray Maggiano was one of the people that helped draft that letter for me. I had about 5 people who drafted some things up, and then I added things in my stamp. You know, it takes a village to write a pastoral letter too. I'm very happy about that. So, and so it's good to have written materials, but especially in our age, to have people listen and hear also makes a difference.
Yes.
One thing I'd like to add, that Ta-Nehisi Coates, of course, a Baltimorean,
Yes.
and wonderful writer. He did the case of reparations was a topic that he wrote about in the Atlantic. And you can go on. I was doing this last night. I read the article last night about the case for reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He goes into so much of the background. It's well worth taking a look at. It's long, but it's worth it.
What I can also, thank you for that. In fact, that article was one of the key things that helped spark the recent discussions on reparations.
Mhm.
Discussions on reparations predated the Civil War. There were already senators, I forget who the senator was from, who already before the Civil War said, what are we going to do
Mhm.
once the slaves are freed? And, attempts at reparation were always shot down when it came to Black people and slaves, not other groups, but Black people. And one of those schemes, of course, was 40 acres or 40 acres and a mule. But in one of the great acts of another Marylander, John Wilkes Booth, Jr., whose gravesite is in Baltimore there, the Greenmount Cemetery. Flowers are still laid freshly there a lot. Go to his cemetery site here in Baltimore. Well, when he shot President Lincoln, he also shot that scheme down because Andrew Johnson, his successor, who was one of the worst presidents ever, also the first, I believe, to be impeached, he was a Southern sympathizer, and he shot down all attempts to compensate.
Mhm.
Where would we be we would be in a much different place now today if those slaves who had built it, if they had acquired land and the means to make a living.
Yeah.
Where would we be? How much different? That's the importance of never making peace with oppression and do the right thing. And even if it takes generations later, it's never too late to do a good thing and a right thing. Reparations was done actually for some groups. There were some slave owners who were compensated after the Civil War for the losses they received during the Civil War. So there was reparation just by those who caused the problem. All of this has left a deep scar in the nation, and we're still paying for it today. We are still paying, but it's not too late, people. We can be known as a generation that said, we're not going to kick that can down the road any longer. We're going to take it up.
Yep.
And I think we will be a stronger, more harmonious society and a more faithful church afterwards. I should probably end on that and take up a collection.
Bishop Sutton, thank you so much for coming and being with us this morning. This has been wonderful. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you all. God bless you. And God bless you. I want to say one thing about regathering, just for the,
Yes.
that we are data driven in the Diocese of Maryland on what we're allowing churches to do. And right now, in some measure, actually beginning this Sunday, some churches can regather. Every church is going to make a different decision on when and how to do that, but it's based on the size of your congregation and what you can do. I just want to I just want to encourage you on that. It's so hard to make long-term plans because things change so rapidly, but right now things are looking good. Just know that emotionally, part of the journey for Emmanuel and for every other church would be, after so long of not being in church, you almost have to do it in stages, get people used to the fact of coming back again, because fear is a great motivator. And I am concerned that some may never want to come back, and that too would be a mistake. All of the guidelines that we've had in the Diocese of Maryland, even with those who have been worshiping starting the end of May after the big shutdown, but they followed all our guidelines. We haven't had a single case, not a single outbreak of someone catching COVID in any of our churches, even some that have been regathered. So, you know, the guidelines really do work. So whenever you're having those discussions, just try to figure out, not too far in the future, but what can we do, maybe given the numbers where we are now. Very last thing on that, nobody wants to be reckless. And I go to bed every night thinking, did we do the right things to keep people safe? So far we have. Nobody wants to be reckless, but no one wants to also just live in fear where you stay at home and never do anything, don't go to a supermarket, never go to church. But every single day of your life that you've ever stepped inside the doors of a church, you took a risk. You took a risk. 100% safety was never guaranteed in anything. Every time you went to a ball game, every time you went to the supermarket. So just know start to figure out, even personally, people, what's your level of risk you're willing to take in order to regather as a community, because it will be some risk. But chances are you won't get COVID going to church, not under our guidelines, not under the data we have. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. Just be prepared personally and emotionally for what you will do to help regather.
Bishop, have you been vaccinated?
Yes, God, thank God. It's by persistence and luck. Because I'm over 65, but my wife didn't make the cut. She's got a few more years to go before she's 65, so she has not. But no, I've gotten both of them. If you can get that vaccine, no matter which one it is, do so. The more of us that can be vaccinated, the better it is for all of us.
Yeah.
We're in a race against these variants.
Yeah.
So keep trying.
I hate to inflict here, but how many people have been vaccinated so far? At least one. How many? Good. Good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, when you get to a point, and it may be sooner than we thought we were going to be a month ago, when you get a point where, say, half or 70% of your persons have been vaccinated, that also goes into your regathering calculation. Okay, God bless you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Bishop Sutton.
Goodbye. Bye, Anne-Marie. Goodbye, Laura. Bye, Elizabeth.